saying. So our next speaker is a world record holder. So that's pretty wild. She just made her way back from Rio, where she was watching her daughter compete for the second time in an Olympics. I'm not sure how many medals she brought this time, but last time she was there, she brought some medals home, her daughter did. Our friend, Cheryl Treworgy. It's weird. You see it written, it's weird. Nobody can say that, but it's Treworgy. Cheryl Treworgy is a world record holder in long distance running. She made a long and very successful record-holding career out of that, and then went on to become a sports photographer, which she does now with great joy. That's how I know her. I see her out at all the sporting events. Yeah, that's just a joke. Justin introduced me to her. So we're gonna welcome to the stage, please, Cheryl Treworgy.
This is new for me. I'm the jock of the crew. Okay? I'm of the age where you took your husband's name regardless of what your accomplishments were. So I answered to Cheryl Pendlow, to Cheryl Bridges, to Cheryl Flanagan, and to Cheryl Treworgy. There's 3 phases of my life. I don't negate any of them. I answer to all of them because they're all part of me. My story starts in 1964, the beginning of my junior year. I was a majorette with my high school band. I was starting to gain some unwanted weight and had already cut out the ice cream and saltine crackers as my after-school snack. But then I read an article by University of Oregon's track coach, Bill Bowerman, and it was about jogging. He later coached the famous runner Steve Prefontaine and was also one of the founders of Nike. I started running laps after band practice, and Mr. Riley, my social studies teacher, and the boys cross-country coach invited me to run with the boys' team. Next thing I know, the school board had decided I shouldn't run with the boys. I could run on the opposite side of campus by myself, but not with the boys. It was my coach's idea that we approach colleges about an athletic scholarship. Indiana State University's Dr. Eleanor Forsyth St. John was chairperson of the Department of Physical Education for Women. She'd been a 5-sport athlete herself in the 1930s. She was also the forerunner of the Indiana's AIAW Foundation, and that's the women's version of the NCAA. She was responsible for me receiving the first athletic scholarship for a woman in the United States. With no teams in college, I ran in high school boys cross-country meets. The coaches made me wait 5 seconds after the gun went off before I could start. I guess it's so I wouldn't get in the way, but I never got worse than third. I wrote my own race coverage on the long drive home from the meets and slipped it under the door of the sports editor at the Terre Haute Star. Mine was a story local reporter Tom Reck wanted to get right because the entire school was behind me, starting with the president and the board of trustees. He let the locals know when I was mentioned on any of the wire services, adding to the support I always felt from the town and the school. Reading the words other reporters used to describe me were embarrassing, though. Jerry Sofer of the Los Angeles Times in 1971 wrote, and I quote, "Cheryl Bridges is pretty enough to be a model or an airline stewardess or an actress, but she isn't. The long-tressed blonde with the fresh-faced good looks and lithe physique, 5'8", 115 pounds, measurements 35, 24, and 34, is a physical education teacher and distance runner extraordinary. Striding with a smooth grace rare in women runners, she set a world record recently in the Western Hemisphere Marathon at Culver City, California. This past summer, 45 years later, I ran into Jerry at the Olympic trials. And I asked him about this description. Even he was embarrassed about it. He confirmed that they really didn't know any better. This was all new to them. Describing a woman in a sport they only thought was for men. The passing of Title IX in 1962 did its legal part, but change always takes time. With no training in athletic administration, jobs were filled from those of us that had been athletes. In the spring of 1977, 5 years later, I became assistant women's athletic director and head track coach at Michigan State University because the drop-dead date for compliance was fast approaching. The revenue sports hated us. They warned us to stay away from their alumni donors. And the minor sports blamed us for them being reduced to club status. My job was to coordinate facilities. We hosted a women's regional qualifying basketball game at Jennison Fieldhouse. The men's basketball coach, Judd Heathcote, wouldn't allow the women to use any of the locker rooms, varsity or JV. The teams dressed in the dorms and walked across campus in the snow. If you remember right, the fall of '77 is when Magic Irvin Johnson entered Michigan State. And his sister was on my track team as a shot putter. Initially, the skill level of the college women athletes was pretty poor. We had no feeder system. Pay for the coaches of women's teams was poor. But once the salaries began to rise, men lobbied for the positions that the women had filled, and they got them. Another example of limited access to development. We were starting from scratch, again. Looking back, I think it was the dads realizing they could have daughters loving sports that changed the attitudes of the masses towards Title IX. You didn't have to wait to have a boy in the family to have an athlete. I was lucky. I grew up in a family who loved sports. At 6 foot, 6 inches, my dad was a high jumper and basketball player. At 5 foot, 5 inches, my mom played field hockey, tennis, and ice skated. The sports section of the newspaper was the first to be read every morning. I don't think my parents really thought about sports not being acceptable for girls, so I didn't either. But finding opportunities was a monumental barrier. Athletic teams for girls to join were non-existent. Once you left the gym classes of high school, you were pretty much done. Athletic teams for girls to join were only for swimming and tennis and track, and that was for the age group girls. The society thought you should be done by high school. My daughter was lucky too. She grew up with parents that tag-teamed babysitting so that they could get their daily run in. By 5, she was asking when she could go with us. By middle school, delaying dinner until after the workout was done not as a problem at all. We were all on the same page with our priorities. During my running career, I juggled training, competing, and teaching school full-time. I paid my own way to represent the United States on 5 world cross-country teams and ran a world record in the marathon before the United States athletic governing body, the AAU, thought women were ready for 26 miles. Luckily, the phrase "going pro" applied to female athletes by the time my daughter signed with Nike in 2004. She just completed her 4th Olympics in Rio. She's 35 now and may or may not shoot for her 5th team. She wants to have children, but the best part is she has the option. From ignorance and resentment to pride and admiration only took 1 generation in my family's experience. Preparing for my story to tell you made me think of all the female athletes before me that missed out on the experience of competing. Thank you.